Good evening, everyone, and here's some great news about The Outer Worlds. It's coming out in October this year. I think anyone who's been associated with Obsidian or Chris Avallone, like Leonard Boyarsky and Tim Cain, you're going to expect good stuff from. Whether it's storytelling or gameplay or hardcore RPG components, this is the kind of stuff to expect and to wait for. And the two bits of information relate to the game itself, and one of them is the endings. So already we know there are two major paths with smaller diversions within them, the code director confirms. So the way they do those endings are very similar or reminiscent of, let's say, how they did New Vegas. So at the end of the game, there are slides to show you how you affected different things. There are two basic paths at the end, whether you sided with Phineas or the board. That's kind of the first beat of the end, how that played out and what that choice was. So very similar to New Vegas with the slides, how it was done well. Another example how it was done poorly in Mass Effect 3, you have a PowerPoint presentation of just things that were obvious, like, hey, the Krogan survived, so there's a Krogan coming out of a shuttle. And oh, you chose the Soylent Green ending, and oh, they've got a little shiny green vein popping out of their clothing or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, that's not really telling me what's going on when Edie gives a voiceover. It doesn't really help much. So actually having text on the screen with a simple little backdrop makes the story work even better, because a denouement is, at least from a gaming perspective, with choices that matter, it just explains in detail what happened. What did they think of you? What did you do? What did you do to affect these people? What happened to them? How did you help them? Did you hurt them? Was it a big choice? Was it a small choice? Who was involved? That sort of thing. After that, you get a whole series of slides that talk about the results of your actions and the consequences of the choice you made throughout the whole game. So that's fantastic. Now, we don't know exactly how many choices there are. We don't know how big these choices are. We don't know whether you change the outcome of an entire city or an individual. But the fact that they're focusing on this in the ending is exactly what you want to hear. So all this is good stuff. They talk about the different people that you encountered, the different areas that you entered, how you solve certain quests, and what that means for the future of the colony. Okay, so it gets a bit bigger in scope. That's cool. So there are quite a few different endings. I haven't added up all the different permutations, but there's quite a lot of variation. So I don't think there's going to be as many as, let's say, New Vegas, depending on who you side with. But there's two major paths, very similar to The Witcher 2, and that's just fantastic stuff. I mean, we weren't expecting anything fantastically huge, but two choices in a game is at least two playthroughs, and for a game which is sort of an adventure, comedic romp through the stars, that sounds fine. It doesn't have to be anything bigger than that. And the second bit of news, also the same reporting from VGC, or VideoGamesChronicle.com, is this wonderful take that they don't want the game to be politically charged, even though it has political elements in it, as most of these sorts of stories do, or at least Obsidian-style games. So he's been very careful not to lecture players, and this is music to our ears. We don't want to be taught or have a theme jammed down our throats. We want stories to be exactly what they are, shown, not told, and let the themes and feelings and all the other elements of the story occur naturally, occur organically as you play it. This is all fantastic stuff from Boyarsky, again, the same interview. Been very careful not to lecture players with themes featured in the game, telling VGC is the last thing he wants to do. I like money, I'm not against capitalism. In a lot of ways, I'm happy with our society, but of course, there's a lot of ways in which it could be improved. So he's talking about current day. He's going, yeah, capitalism is great. It's not perfect, but that's just how it goes. We started development in April 2016, and a couple of things happened in world politics, of course, between then and now that nobody expected. We weren't expecting that. Okay. So Boyarsky said the Outer Worlds story is less a critique of modern capitalism and more about power and how power is used against people who don't have it. This is a classic theme in every political story or any story that has politics. Now you might say, well, power is pretty much in every concept of man versus man, man versus self, man versus nature. It's like, yeah, but what kind of power? In the concept of political power. It refers to control, what you can and can't do in a society, in a country, in a city, in a town, all the laws therein. So that's pretty standard in Fallout games as well. You have all list of rules you can't break. You can't go slaughtering a town. Of course, they let you, but then you'll be vilified by that town and be seen as an enemy. He said, it can be insidious, the way which people control the stories you tell about the world. If you let other people control that narrative, then they can control you to a certain degree. That can be any form of government. If it wasn't capitalism, it could be something else. So he's not specifically talking about capitalism, although they're doing a play on the concept of the Wild West and what would happen if all these corporations ran space or the freedom of space. That's kind of a Bioshock-style vibe to it. Boyarsky added that he's tried to balance these themes with the humorous tone his previous games are known for. And if you know anything about Tim Cain, it's almost impossible not to separate that man from the code and the themes and content of the game world itself, especially when he's a co-creator of the game. He lives for jokes. He lives putting all those jokes inside all the dialogue, all the choices, and you gotta sort of rein him in so he doesn't overdo it. Who knows exactly how much content is comical and ridiculous? It depends on your mileage on how much you appreciate comedy in an RPG. I don't want people to think this is a really hard, politically charged game. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be humorous. So the main themes are comedy. Comedy, exploration, RPG mechanics, shooting, and the setting determines the politics. The choices you make determines how you impact those people. Whether you help them out politically or not, we'll find out. Having grown up in America and have been through the onslaught of consumer culture, we're very familiar with that and like to poke fun at it. That's a fantastic way. Humor is one of the best methods for using a way of communicating a message without directly pointing at it, without giving names. It's the point of satire is it allows people to an avenue that say, okay, I know what they're talking about, depending on how heavy-handed it is, how silly it is, how unbelievable it is. You can get away a lot of things in satire that you can't in other forms of comedy. But like how with 2001 RPG Arcanum, we were dealing with racial issues, the story always comes down to balance of power and how people get power and how they use it. We've been very careful. I've been very careful. So this is exactly what you want to hear from a writer. He's like, you know what? We have these themes. Here's one from back then. I know what I'm doing. I'm very careful. They've been very careful. It's like, okay, great. He's being overly cautious here for some reason, but that's good. This is all good stuff. There are people in this game who have philosophies that I don't agree with, and I take pains to make those people very likable, very sensible, and very believable. This is like the holy trinity of creating a character. Then there are people in the game who say things I agree with, who are perhaps not very nice to hang out with. So the main word here is believable. If we talk about fiction, you want these people to, okay, this crazy person, I can believe where they're coming from. I can believe their existence. I believe what they're saying. That's value number one in storytelling in general. When you're talking about characters, I would replace the word likable with attractiveness. So how attractive are these characters? And you need to have a level of identity or be able to identify with that character. That's what makes them likable. So a crazy raving lunatic that slaughters a village sounds like, okay, he's just a bad guy and the story needs a bad guy. But if you understand why he's doing that, why he's so murderous, why did he commit this horrific act, then you identify with that character and you're attracted to that character, even if you don't actually like what they did. Obviously, no one likes going around slaughtering villages. So it's when you understand them by identifying their humanity and what caused them to be that way. What makes a bad guy turn bad? That's a great story. That's why we have villains, and that's why villains are usually more attractive than the heroes. So we don't want to set up straw men or anything. This guy is great. He's using all these buzzwords. So we don't want to set up straw men or anything and say, look how horrible this is. It's really about looking at all aspects of issues. The last thing we want to do is make a game that people feel is lecturing them. This guy could be writing a book. These are all very good standards to follow when composing a story. You don't create some scapegoat or boogeyman and hit and poke him with your lance as if you're tilting at windmills. You want to see every aspect of an issue before you throw it down. And that's really hard to do with comedy. Comedy doesn't work for most people in a lot of ways. And if you can do satire right, it's pretty impressive. I'm not very good with comedy myself. That's why when I see people do it well, I'm like, wow, these guys clearly know what they're doing. If they're making an entire game about it, that takes a lot of consistent storytelling and consistent vibes and themes for you to get that feeling every time it works. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. It's not going to work. It's not every joke is not going to land, but you're going to be giggling to yourself. You're going to be having a good time. Probably more so than the comedic level of Fallout, as well done as those stories were. The Outer Worlds team stance echoes that of Ubisoft, which recently moved to explain why its teams balance apolitical views in games informed by highly politicized real-world events. I guess that would be relatable to Assassin's Creed series or their various other open-world style games. Okay. Ubisoft wants its games to educate players so they can formulate their own ideas. All right. That's fine. That's cool. Have ideas, have morally gray areas that the audience can appreciate and draw their own conclusions. This is all good stuff. And I'm happy that this is the attitude that the team, not just Boyarsky, but the team itself, has been following. Obviously, Tim Cain had a big influence on the comedy. And you know you're doing something right. This is a little cherry on top out of all this. You're doing something right when the insane people of the left, whether they're the far left or the SJW left or whatever aspect of the political left, don't like or have something to say about. And of course we have the poster child for all that is crazy is Jonathan McIntosh. And he's referring to the PC Gamer article, which is referencing, I believe, this or that post. And he says, it's a corporate dystopia where huge conglomerates control and run an entire planet for profit. But don't worry, that's just a meaningless aesthetic choice, and the game has nothing interesting to say about its setting or premise. Our story world is empty of pointless. We swear, I don't know what that last sentence means. Our story world is empty and pointless. We swear. He's trying to be comical here, and we don't understand these people's mindset, so I can't even attempt to figure out what he's making fun of. Is he being facetious? Does he like the idea? Does he not like the idea? Does he think that Leonard is just being overly safe? I'm not sure, but anytime we hear anything from this guy, and of course I had to sign out of Twitter because he blocked me, God knows how many years ago, for who knows what reason. So you know you're on the right path with politics in your video games when the insane people are trying to be funny. It's just right on the money. So thanks guys for listening. Have yourself a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.